Hi, my name is Mr. Summer and I'm a student here at Ball State University. And today I'm going to be teaching you a little bit about what subject-verb agreement is and maybe how we can use it. Let's get right into it. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and look into some of this stuff. Again, we are looking at subject-verb agreement. What we'll be discussing, therefore, is the basic structure of agreement and looking at parts of the subject, parts of the verb, what those look like, what they'd be defined as, and perhaps how we'd use them. And again, we're not going to find specific rules, but we're going to be looking at some patterns. Therefore, there's going to be some exceptions to the patterns that we'll also look at. And 3 of those exceptions we'll look at are subject-verb separation, verb-subject sentences, and collective noun trickery. Again, we're looking at particularly action or activity verbs. We're not going to be looking at linking or copular verbs, and those are things such as to be, where I am, you are, he is, and having, I have to run, she has to, whatever. We're looking at action or activity verbs that are in the present tense. These are ones that you'll probably recognize as we're going, but they are things that refer to actions, things that refer to activities. So what is it anyways? A subject is a noun or a noun phrase that usually comes before the verb and is doing or being something in a sentence. And what is a verb anyways? It expresses action. It expresses existence or a state of being or an occurrence. And these are definitions I'm sure you probably heard before in one way or another, but this is how we're going to apply them to subject-verb agreement. Subjects and verbs must agree in number and person in order for a sentence to make complete sense. So, we look at 2 parts here that we have subjects and verbs, and we also see that they must agree in 2 ways, number and person. Now that's really important to realize as we go ahead, because that's something that's really going to apply with singular subjects, take singular verbs, and plural subjects take plural verbs. This is something, again, keep that in mind as we look at this over and over again, and I'll reference back to this. But kind of our main point is that, again, subjects and verbs must agree in number and person in order for a sentence to make complete sense. Now, our basic sentence kind of looks like this. Maybe you've seen it before as well. Maybe you recognize it from sentences you've seen. We have a subject, normally at the start, a verb that normally follows it, and then other stuff that is optional. That's why it's in parentheses there. So, an example, we've got birds, eat, fries. Birds is our subject, eat is our verb, and that other stuff that's not necessary is fries. And why is it not necessary? We could have the sentence just be birds eat. So, you think about that, and you've already got a full sentence, whereas the fries just kind of adds detail. The main things, again, we're focusing on are the birds, which is your subject, and eat, which is your verb. So making the subject and verb agree takes a little bit of work. Again, reminder, subjects and verbs must agree in number and person in order for a sentence to make complete sense. So we'll look first at what number is. Number is either singular or it's plural. So think of bird versus birds. We have 1 bird and 2 birds. Person is what perspective or angle the sentence is from. That'd be I am talking about something versus you are talking about something versus the birds are singing about something. So let's look at first maybe some number examples so we can get a little more grasp on what that is. Number examples with subjects that we got a dog. It's introduced as singular. Does not end in the letter S. A dog versus multiple dogs or some dogs. So there again we notice that some dogs is plural and it ends in an S. We know that a dog would just be 1 single dog, and some dogs is who knows how many, plural. It's at least more than 1, and therefore it ends in S. Something maybe you've again seen before, but now we're going to apply it to this. So we also have person, and this is a person example with subjects. I, this is you, the person speaking, it's the sentence maker, and that therefore is called the first person. So I do whatever. And then he is another example of a person with subjects. And this is not you, it's not who you're talking to, it's the third person. It's the third person that maybe isn't there, and therefore is the third person. Again, just kind of a quick little review there, maybe things you've already heard before. But now we're going to apply it to subject-verb agreement. So let's look at maybe a chart that might make this a little more sense. So we have our singular and plural like we talked about before. We also have our person, which would be our perspective, or that would be our person again. So we have first person, second person, and third person. And now these apply across with singular and plural. So you can have first person singular, which would be I, or you can have other examples we're going to look at. So here is the chart filled out with your subjects, your people that would be in these places. So singular first person would be I. You think of me, I, present, I. Second person would be who you're talking to, you. Third person would be he, she, over there, or we also include it, but that could be anything. So my example here, a pretty normal noun, would be dog. For plural, we've got we. For second person plural, we is your first person plural, so I and some others. For second person plural, you've got you all, or y'all. Think of talking to a person and the people he is around, that would be y'all. And then third person would be they, plural people that aren't there, or with our normal noun, dogs. So making the subject and verb agree again, number and person examples with verbs. So we have number and person need to match up with our verbs, because remember we said before that a singular subject takes a singular verb, plural subject takes a plural verb, and those need to agree for the sentence to make sense. So we have eat, normal verb, or eats. We have teach or teaches. Both of those look different, right? So let's go ahead and figure out why they're different. So here is it plugged back into that chart. We've got singular first person, eat. We've got singular second person, eat. We've got singular third person, eats. So there you see there's an S. It adds an S onto the end. Now remember before we saw an adding S to know that a noun was plural. Here this little pattern does not match up with verbs. Okay, so that is not the same. They do not act the same way. Eats does not mean it's a plural verb. As you can see on the right side, none of them have an S. But again, that's just a pattern. So this is one example of that. So here we have it plugged in with some subjects. We have I eat, you eat, he, she, or the dog eats. So again with that S tacked on the end. And that you can see only applies to the singular third person. He eats, she eats, the dog eats. Whereas with the plural, we have we eat, you all eat, or they eat, the dogs eat. Again, the S does not mean that it's plural. That is the pattern that showed up with our nouns. Something with a noun with an S normally means it's plural. Now looking at another verb, we have teach. So we have I teach, you teach, he teaches, she teaches, and the dog teaches. Again, ending with an S, but this time it's ES. So we have only with the singular third person ES. Now for verbs, for verbs with the plural, ending in the same way, we have we teach, you all teach, they teach, or the dogs teach. Only time that it has the ES in this pattern is with the third person singular, he, she, or it. So here's some examples for you. Let's go ahead and I'll show you the first one, and then we'll go ahead and try to find where each of these parts are. So, looking at this one, Mrs. Rose teaches English. Now the subject would be Mrs. Rose. Teaches would be your verb. We looked at that one just a little while ago, and you can see that it ends in ES. Now English would be that other stuff. It doesn't need it, but it helps our sentence, and it really does actually explain some more. So here it is all laid out. Blue for subject, orange for verb, red for that kind of extra stuff. And again, Mrs. Rose was your subject, and since Mrs. Rose is kind of in that she category, he, she, it, since Mrs. Rose is a she, then she is a third person singular, and therefore that's the only time that it takes on that ES on the end. Again, this is a pattern, but let's go ahead and look at another example. Now, this one's a little harder for you guys. And we've got my arms love you, my ears adore you, my knees shake with blind affection. So let's try to think of what would your subject be. Remember, a subject is a noun or a noun phrase that is doing or being something in your sentence. Alright, if you're still thinking, we do have 3 here. There are 3 different subjects. A little more difficult for you. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at these. We've got my arms love you, my ears adore you, my knees shake with blind affection. Our 3 subjects are my arms, my ears, and my knees. So now we know where the subjects are. We know what the things are that are doing things in your sentence, that are kind of acting in your sentence. So let's try to think of what the verb is. What is it that these subjects are doing? And let's take a second to look for those. Now if you remember the pattern again, we normally had subject plus verb plus other stuff. So if that helps you find them, try to look for them just a little while longer. Okay, now where these ones are actually going to come right after each one of these subjects. So we have my arms love you, my ears adore you, my knees shake with blind affection. And what is that last stuff? That's all going to be your little red stuff, so let's fill that in. And that's kind of the extra thing. But again, we're looking at your subject was my arms, ears, and knees, and your verbs were love, adore, and shake. Each of those matched up with the subject. Now you can also notice, do any of these end with S? Any of your verbs? Do any of your verbs end with S? No, they don't. And why is that? Your subject end with S. Therefore, those are plural. And if you remember, only when it is singular and in the third person would it have an S for the verb. Again, a pattern, something that we're looking at, but we have my arms, that would be it, but in the plural, they. They love you, they adore you, they shake with blind affection. That's a good quote from The Princess Bride. If you haven't read it, you guys should probably read it. Now let's do one more here. So we have I eat the hamburger and he watches the movie. We have two subjects here, but as you can see, things look a little different. So let's first find the subjects. Again, thinking of the regular pattern that starts with subject, verb, other stuff. Where are your subjects here? Alrighty, so we had I and he. Those are both of our subjects. We could see that they were doing or being something in the sentence. Now, what are they doing or being? What is the verb? Okay, so again, there are two verbs for this part. Let's look at first, we had I. Now, what would I be doing? It's going to be eat. We have he. What is he doing? Watches. So I eat the hamburgers and he watches the movie. Now, what do you notice here? We do have one that ends with S, but the other one doesn't. Again, this is looking at the pattern that singular first person is eat. I eat. Now, that one doesn't have an S because it's singular, it's first person. Whereas he watches, that is, again, our singular third person. Again, ES. The verb is ending in S or ES, which indicates, shows you that it is third person singular. Those have to match up for the sentence to make sense. Note, the optional parts, they do not affect the verb. This is something I want to point out too. I eat the hamburgers. See, we have plural burgers because it ends in S there, but that doesn't change the verb, right? The verb matches with the subject, I eat. It isn't I eats the hamburgers, it's I eat. Again, he watches the movie. The movie does not affect watches. He affects it. I could say, I watch the movie, or she watches the movie, or we watch the movie. The only one there was he, she, or it watches the movie. And that's the only one that has the ES. And what we all came down to was again that subjects and verbs must agree in number and person in order for a sentence to make complete sense. And even if things seem a little weird, you still stick to that rule that subjects and verbs must agree in number and person. It's all about who is doing what and how you say that with action or activity verbs in a sentence. So your who would be your subjects. Doing what? What they're doing is going to be your verbs. So again, thanks a ton for joining. I'm going to go ahead and flash up real quick because I'm more excited. But that is how we're going to look at subjects and verbs going together. And hopefully that made some sense. Hopefully that's going to help you out with what you're going to do for the rest of your English life.